Hey friends, and welcome back to my studio. Today we're going to be working on the flesh of the Centaur, and I have to tell you, it's been an interesting few sessions going through the different color combinations until I arrived at a color tone that I really like. For this first session, we are going to be painting with a brush, and I use the Winsor & Newton Series 7 brushes. They are a natural Kolinsky sable brush, and they hold on to a very sharp tip for a long time if they're cared for properly. This makes them well worth the $15, as you can use a larger brush and hold more paint and still do a lot of highly detailed work. For this work, we're going to be using a number 1 for the entire session. My current brush for this session needs to be replaced, but you'll see that it works just fine for what I'm doing. Up in the right corner, I've started to use a second video feed so that you can see my palette. I'm using the Stay Wet palettes that you can find on Amazon, and I generally find that the paper works a bit better for me than a little bit of the regular baking paper. And this paper you have to soak in water and then microwave, and it makes it a little bit more translucent, and I think maybe that's why I like it a little bit better. So first, we're going to begin by placing the colors onto the palette. Scale 75 Basic Skin, Scale 75 Light Skin, Scale 75 Pale Skin, Scale 75 Pink Flesh, and then Reaper Dark Shadow. So let's get some colors mixed, and in this session we're going to be trying to work from dark to light, and you'll see that what we'll end up with is going to be somewhat of a warm finish, leaning towards the same color tones that the horse gives. So let's begin here with our dark base coat. So what I'm going to end up doing is covering the entire portion of the flesh with this medium dark color. This is still semi-translucent, and we're going to be able to see some of the warm colors that we introduced earlier underneath this portion of the skin. But I am trying to give us a decent base, and then once we finish this, we'll start working on the shadow areas. So you can see here I'm leaving the top portion brighter and not putting that shadow area in, just because we already know that we're going to be hitting that. That's our main direct source of light coming directly onto the shoulder and onto that side of the head, so we don't even need to worry about it. I'm going to introduce a little bit of green, I believe, to the palette, as well as some deep blue from Scale 75. These are color tones that I do not make great use of in this session, but we will make a lot more use of them later on. The purpose is to introduce life into the shadow areas. So we're going to try to make them darker, but we're also going to try to make them a little bit bluer, because in the color wheel, your blue is sitting across from your oranges and reds, so it's a complementary color. And I could totally be getting that word wrong, complementary. It might be the other word. But that is something that you definitely want to do, is you want to be able to mix your warms and your cool colors in a certain stylistic way. It adds, like I said, it adds more life, but it also gives your piece a much more artistic value, and you'll see that as we progress back and forth with these tones. not know why it got all of a sudden got a lot brighter and then went a lot darker. I noticed that in some of the other sessions too, so I apologize for that. We're mixing in a warm mid-tone right now. I'm finding it easier to dub over the work that I've done, even though I'm talking through this whole session while I'm working. It just makes better sense to learn how to do this properly. So I apologize while I'm learning. I have to actually sit here and watch, what I'm doing back and decipher exactly what the best way is to represent what I'm doing. So we're going to hit these ebbs from the side, and then we're going to start hitting the highlight colors, and we're going to start going back and forth between midtone and highlight, trying to get an even balance. And it's going to turn out decently well, I think, by the time we're finished with all of this. But we're going to see that there's going to be a lot more work to do later to get all this to look right. So just kind of enjoy the process and understand that as I do this, I'm experimenting with how the colors look together, and it's not necessarily going to be the way that it's going to be in the finished piece. I'm not to the stage yet where I can lay down one coat of paint and say this is exactly what I want. We're still doing some experimentation, and I hope that with you guys watching that you'll be able to see some of the good things that I do and some of the mistakes that I make. That way you don't have to make those mistakes, or you know that those mistakes are just fine. That's what everybody does, and we're still going to end up with a really, really good, solid piece at the end. So you can see that we're shifting pretty warm in the color tones while we're going back and forth between the midtone and the highlight. The character's getting lower and lower. And camera view. We'll be working on that too. The most interesting parts of this character is that under the arm portion, that large lateral muscle. It is, in my opinion, it's getting hit by light, but then it's also getting stuck under the shadow because it's underneath his arm. So it's a really interesting problem to solve by saying, okay, well, we've got light hitting this chest and shoulder and it's going to get in there, but how much light do I give that lateral muscle versus how much shadow is being overtaken by the arm and the shoulder being on top of it. So we're continuing to raise those highlight areas, and then what's going to end up happening is we dumb them down and then we raise them up, and then we dumb them down and we raise them up. And by doing that over and over again, it does make the process, I think, a little bit smoother. But at the same time, we're still just trying to figure out what is going to give us the proper color tone with those midtones and highlights. And I'm also trying to get a good gradient off of each abdominal muscle, where there's a good fall off and kind of a rounded shape to the highlight as it's going up. So you'll see me work on that too. Here we're trying to blend a little bit. Even though it's sped up, you can see that the brush strokes are not super long, but the longer that they are, the thinner the paint is. If I'm making wide brush strokes, it's because the paint is being thin and I'm glazing on top and I'm trying to smooth something out. Looks like we're dropping a little bit of darker tones onto the face a little bit. Now we're going to go in and really try to maximize the darkness in the shadow areas. So I'm using that dark skin, and we're going to basically outline all the dark spaces. I know that I'm going to be going back over this, so I know that I can go a little bit crazy with the contrast. So look at that light happening again. I'm seriously going to look into that now. It's very strange. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen over the course of all of the sessions up till now, which luckily is just still working on this torso. But we'll see what happens. I think it might just stay at this level. So we're adding in more darkness, so trying to get that shadow down, still working the shadows. So we're going back into a midtone. This is a much more warm, yellowed midtone, and I'm going over the top of a lot of this. So this is what you would consider a glaze. And at this point, I'm trying to tie in the skin to the rest of the body. And it does its job very well. But you can see that we're losing a lot of that highlight value. So now we're going to go back, bring that highlight value back in, and we're going to stay with some warmer tones for now. We're still in a mid to high light tone. It's not super high. So I'd say this is like if you were to divide mid-tone into two pieces with one tilting towards high, that's what we're working on, and it's still pretty warm. The reality is here, what we're doing that's incorrect is we're still giving the highlight tones the same value from the top of his head all the way down to the bottom of his stomach. And that's not what you really want to go for. You want a gradient of lightest at the top where we're working on right now to darkest highlight down at the base of his stomach. And we're going to work on that as we progress through this. So trying to go back in and reinstitute some of the contrast. So now here we're bringing back a lot of warmth into that shadow area. You can see that this is a very tan color that we're introducing, and this is a pretty appropriate for the tone that we're going for. Now we're using dark shadow again, outlining all the core. Reintroducing a higher contrast. And we're going to attempt to introduce a little bit of a bluish color. And this is appropriate as well. So in the darkest shadows, we're using a dark blue. So we mixed that first batch of color, which was way too bright, probably way too green as well. And then we mixed a second batch that was tilting towards black, good dark color, perfect for the recesses. The coldness, again, makes that recess come to life. We're mixing up a new color here. Looks like very warm. Luckily very thin as well. And we're glazing. Looks like by the speed of it, we're glazing over the whole thing. So this is a blending. Okay, so now we're bringing in the airbrush, and I am mixing a glaze. It's going to be a very thin coat. It does not look like it's thin, but it is mostly flow improver and isopropyl alcohol with 1 drop of color in there. And I'm thinking I used orange, Mars orange, possibly, to do this, I think. And this is where everything starts to go just a little bit south. It's not necessarily bad. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do some blending. We are going to airbrush over this. We're going to make the colors blend in really well with the horse. Absolutely excellently well. However, I have this crazy epiphany as soon as I finish doing all this work. Contrast is not there. We're not super high on contrast. We don't have a great flow from dark to light as we move up the abdomen toward the top of the head. That's fine, that's all easy to fix. Kind of left it that way to be planned. But I decide, hey, let's go contrasty and use cool colors. Pinks, grays, blues, whites. Those types of tones for the skin, instead of using the brown color that you get from the horse. So in the next session, you're going to see that. And that should come out pretty much just after this one. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. Please subscribe and like, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.